Hello again and welcome back. Part 5. We're steaming through these, aren't we? So,
Yeah.
part 5 of our little journey through the forthcoming Oracle of the Hekatean Path. So, in this one, we are going to cover cards 19 through to card 24. So, fire away, Kenneth.
Well, we're starting off with probably one of my favourites.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Realize.
this is number 19, the psychopomp card, the soul guide.
Hmm.
And I kind of knew what I wanted with this, and I think it was pretty much a sort of cut and shut deal with this one. There wasn't really anything that needed fiddling with.
No.
I kind of told you I'd found a really good source image of a torch bearing goddess on a relief, I think it was. And then I said, oh, and I want it to be like have this figure on the floor as though it's like dead. And then I said, and I wanted this like silhouette to be rising up out of the body.
Yeah.
And I think at first you were kind of, I don't think you quite saw it initially, and then when I explained it a bit more, you kind of went, "Oh, I get it," and then it just was like, "Bish bash bosh done."
Well, it was when you kind of explained it again, and the penny dropped, and then that was a light bulb moment because I thought, right, I've got just the images, and because there was a lovely stock image that the figure at the bottom is based on, and it's of a tomb statue. And of course, it's obviously just a woman asleep in inverted commas, carved in marble, and the figure, obviously the figure of her spirit rising from her. That's actually a silhouette that I recycled from the Healing Light Tarot, and because if anybody has seen the Healing Light Tarot, the Eight of Swords, I kind of take a slightly different take on the Eight of Swords. I mean, the traditional meaning is the same. But rather than showing a woman sort of tied up, I show her actually caught in a spider's web. And that silhouette I used, but at a much different angle. And it just worked perfectly because the posture, it really looks as if she's rising out of the sleeping figure. So it was funny because once the penny dropped at what you wanted to achieve, I thought, yeah, bang, 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 this, that sequence, those colours were done. And it was kind of one of the quickest images, wasn't it? Because we finished it and we were both looking at the screen and thinking, oh, that's worked. And then it's like, what's the catch?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit. I know it was a bit fiddly because you had to draw around the initial statue image to make to take it, but and obviously the interpretation is quite literal as far as like this idea of soul guiding. Yet the interpretation behind it isn't necessarily. We're not talking about you're going to drop down dead and you're going to levitate out of your body, near death experiences type thing, but it is about that death into the afterlife transition is like the biggest transition you could probably think of next to sort of being born into the world.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's kind of there's a theme of commonality through so many different religions, many of which claim to have exclusivity on it. But the bottom line is they kind of, they've all nicked somebody else's idea. You die and some reassuring heavenly guide comes down and guides you out of your body and onto the next world or into the underworld or wherever. And it's just a beautiful, reassuring thought. And again, it was with this card, I hadn't thought of. Just sort of reiterating what was said in earlier videos. I mean, my background is obviously in academic theology. That's what I did my degree in. It was Christian theology, but it never dawned on me that there was an equivalent within the worship of Hecate. It's a common theme within Christianity. I mean, invariably, it's angels that will come and guide you within Christianity.
Well, I mean, indeed, the ancient Greek word where we get angel from is angelos, which just means messenger, and that was another epithet that was associated with Hecate in that respect. But also this notion that she can move freely between the underworld, the our realm, and the upper realm. again, it's this idea. This is reflected in the psychopomp. It's a role that she shares with Hermes. They can go between the different realms. She acts as this guide to Persephone when she's ushering her backwards and forwards through through the underworld. But it's our own transitions through our own personal underworld journeys and things like that. You can look at this image and you could potentially envisage that the husk of the dead body, that's the things holding you back, and she is drawing you out of that free and unfettered so that you can transition into the next phase of whatever is coming next. So it's not quite as literal.
No,
once you start sort of digging into it. But I think I did really like the fact that we kept it quite spectral and quite sort of ethereal as well, without being too overly sort of sepulchral or morbid. It has that sort of fine line between sort of deathly glow and ethereal sort of glow as well. And I liked the fact that we kept that with the torch, this very penetrating flame, but that doesn't necessarily give off warmth. It's a very
cold fire. And it's funny because it was something that I hadn't really thought of. I was looking at the images we were talking, and I thought, it's fire, but it's not. It's otherworldly.
Yeah, and it's about the sensation of that cold fire is still very penetrating, but instead of maybe the more destructive force of hot fire, it seeps in enough for it to draw you out. And I think that's that was the difference I wanted to sort of illustrate on this.
There's so many parallels with the card that we looked at in the last installment of this, of the guide, in the tunnel. And it's interesting because, again, something I hadn't thought of, the fact that you were talking about the soul rising up out of the husk of the body. But actually in non-literal terms, whenever we go through these kind of metaphorical deaths and rebirths, we always leave something behind. And I think that's portrayed beautifully here. You don't, whether this is literal or whether it's a metaphor, or something always gets left behind, an old attitude, an old way of viewing life. It's like it's a purification as well as a calling forward, isn't it? It's a very beautiful card. It did feel eminently straightforward to create, but at the same time, now I look at it and it's kind of one of those more meditative cards for me in the deck, because it really challenges me personally. And I think particularly over recent experience, it kind of makes me look at not just that sort of death rebirth process, but the whole purification process as well. But there's something about the cold fire in this. It's also a gentle flame. That's what I like. But just so much, as I think the one thing that's striking me as we're doing this guided tour is just how interconnected and how unified, the deck is in a way that I kind of hadn't realized. And we're kind of revisiting common themes about the goddess, but actually in different aspects and from different facets. And it's a wonderful journey for me. And I thought, it's a journey that's continuing, even though we finished the deck a long time ago now,
Yeah.
So moving on, this is another personal favorite of mine, number 20. It was another fairly straightforward image to create, but I love, this is the most peaceful card of the deck. This is Philaremos, the Lover of Solitude, card 20. And the keyword on this is retreat, isn't it? Which I think maybe this is what appeals to me. There's a real safety in this card. Tell me what your concept was with this, because I loved the image, but tell me what kind of...
Obviously, this notion of lover of solitude, it kind of goes into this into seeing Hecate as this independent goddess that moves around, under her own, commands and stuff. She's not really beholden to anybody else. And as we see in things like Zeus giving, allowing her. I mean, when I say allowing her, I don't necessarily mean that. I kind of think more that he didn't really have a choice. He kind of knew which side his bread was buttered on, and it was better not to pick a fight with Hecate. But we'll get to that when we get to him later. But yeah, with this one, there was almost a notion of touching ever so slightly on sort of the hermit energy from the tarot, but this notion that you can benefit from being completely removed from things, and the word retreat, it has a few interpretations. Do you need to literally retreat from something, or do you need to just take time in retreat to explore things? But obviously it's easy to sort of to think that being on your own is somehow a problem. So the inclusion of the dog, obviously dogs and Hecate are quite obviously closely linked, but there was this notion that you're not really alone, that there is this companionship. And I mean, you can look at the image on this card in a couple of different ways. You can see that as Hecate and her hound. You could see that as yourself and Hecate by your side in the guise of a hound. There are a few interpretations, but I just wanted this very peaceful and stark sort of expanse with just literally a clear night sky with just a sliver of a moon, just everything. There's a quiet that you can almost audibly hear by looking at the card. Yeah.
I love this. It was one of the simpler images on so many levels, but on another, it's one of the most powerful for me. And also what I loved is just subtle attention to detail. I mean, you asked me to sort of make both the hound and the woman slightly transparent. So there's a kind of real liminal feel about this image. I mean, we've got sort of subtle layers of mist. The figures are sort of there, but they're not quite there. And the effect of that for me is that we're kind of given the privilege of stepping into this world actually through the vision of the card, but somehow not quite. They're not quite there. They're in their own space. And it didn't, to me, if I stepped into this image, if I could treat this as a portal and step into, I still wouldn't be quite there because they're not completely solid. And they're just somehow slightly out of phase and slightly removed. And it kind of really sort of reinforces the positive nature of the solitude in this. And as you say, that it's all right to be alone. We can be, it's aloneness does not equate with loneliness. And I think that it for me, this was a really reassuring aspect of the goddess, that I could actually draw on that strength that makes aloneness a virtue rather than something to be feared. And it's also something to be celebrated. I think just the very peacefulness of the image makes it something to be celebrated, because loneliness is a very tormented solitary space. This isn't, this is eminently tranquil.
Yeah.
It's a lovely card. And I'm really glad that this is an aspect that you did include in the deck, because it's not one that would have been obvious to me, No,
and I mean, I think the one of the tweaks that we did do with this one was that I did change the keyword for it, because I think because in the original incarnation we had it as privacy.
That's right.
When I started to look back through the finished deck and look at some of the other cards, I did change it, and I took one of the keywords from another card that we haven't got to yet, and put it onto this one. And it just it was just, it instantly elevated it, because although privacy, it says it to a certain level, when you put retreat onto it, say you've got that double meaning, and it just suddenly felt a lot more succinct in what I was trying to sort of do with this card.
I think as well, because I mean, for a lot of people, I mean, for you and I mean, we both have experience of retreat from a spiritual perspective. You know, we've both been on formally organized retreats, and it is something very different. You know, it is something very different from privacy. I mean, a retreat affords privacy, but it's actually, I love all the implications of choosing to sort of step aside from activity and from company and from the world for a set period of time. And also you have the free will to step back in, you know, that's so I think the using retreat as a key word for this, I think works, as you say, a lot better. Even though privacy summed up, you know, it did kind of sum up some of it, but not all, I think. But I love it. I do. Now, I think this next one is one of your favourites, isn't it?
It is.
Card 21, Nycteria of the Night. And the keyword on this is secrets, isn't it?
Yeah. So, obviously, you know, we've discussed previously Hecate's relationship to things like the moon. And, you know, it is, although she has some solar aspects, there is a lot more sort of going for this nighttime aspect. But when we look at, obviously, one of the most sacred times is when there is no moon in the sky, the dark of the moon. And so when you've got that sort of all-encompassing darkness, you know, there is a sort of air of secrecy about it. You know, this is those times when there's no light in the sky. Those are the times when, you know, the thieves are scuttling around, and you know, there's all those connotations with it. And yet at the same time, when we look at, obviously, the image that we created on this, you know, the goddess with the canopy of stars over her head, holding a torch, but not holding it aloft. She's kind of holding it slightly downward and out. And is it illuminating? Is it sort of, is she going to stub it out? You know, it's not quite as prominent as some of the others. And there's that ethereal quality to it. She kind of disappears into the darkness, but at the same time, she has the potential to shine light on secrets, on illusion, on deceit. Or she can shroud you, or, you know, when something you want to keep secret, she can shroud you in the canopy of stars and darkness that will sort of deflect, you know, view onto whatever it is that you want to keep secrets. And I think, again, secrets it's a word that has a lot of negative connotations. People seem to assume that if you're keeping a secret, therefore you're doing something wrong, and not necessarily. No, exactly. It's, you know, I think secrets and truth go hand in hand, because sometimes keeping a secret sometimes means denying a truth. You know, it's not necessarily about lying, but it's about denial of truth. And I think, you know, she can shine the light on those things and actually make, you know, where it's necessary and suitable, she can make the secrets, you know, transform them into truths, and therefore, you know, you can live a truer path in life.
I think there's an aspect of this card to me as well, in that, you know, it's interesting you saying that, you know, people equate secrets with wrong, whereas actually secrets are an essential part of life. You know, every single one of us has a secret aspect, and I equate this card to intimacy on a lot of levels, you know, because we all have a personal life, we have an intimate life, you know, that actually nobody else is fully party to, you know. But I sort of see the goddess in this instance. I mean, you know, particularly when you enter into an intimate relationship with someone, I kind of saw this as, you know, the goddess actually illuminating certain aspects of those secrets, you know, the closer you get. But it actually, this card reminds me that it's actually a perfectly healthy and wholesome part of life. There will always be a part of us that only we experience and divinities experience. No other person will experience, because ultimately you can't get inside me and I can't get inside you, you know? And to me, this is it's an affirming card in that respect, in that it affirms the, the hallowed quality of secrets. But I also love this because a lot of the Egyptian mythology fascinates me. And as soon as, we were doing this card and you were explaining this aspect of it to me, I thought, I was immediately drawing the parallel with the goddess Nut, and the way the Egyptians saw the canopy of the Milky Way as the goddess actually bending over the dome of the sky and sort of, encompassing the world, So again, I love the parallels between two different religious systems and mythologies, but ultimately those mythologies are actually, tackling the same universal truth. It's just it made me sort of look at this in a different way. And so the statue that we used on this, was this a statue of Hecate, or is it?
So it's one of those statues that I think is actually attributed to be Selene, as in the moon goddess.
Yeah.
But I'm always of this thing that obviously Hecate has gained in popularity fairly recent times. But obviously we do know from historical record and that there were statues, there were images of the goddess, and obviously when a couple of 100 years ago in the Victorian era and all that kind of stuff, when everybody was labeling stuff, it was easier to say, oh, this is a statue of Artemis, or this is a statue of Diana, because Diana and Artemis, they did sometimes they were depicted with torches or with a dog, a hunting dog and things. And there are some instances where it's not necessarily readily identifiable as one or another, and it just seems convenient for them to say, oh, it's Artemis. And you think, well, is it, or is it Hecate? And I kind of look at statues like this one that's it's supposed to represent Luna or Selene, and obviously there is again was equation between Hecate and Selene, and so I kind of, I don't know, I'm kind of at that point where it's like it could quite easily be. We will never know. When things get dug up, they don't necessarily always have a label on them. It's nice if if there's an inscription, which sometimes there are. People will have inscribed it and say this is a statue of which I've made as an offering or to say thanks for something. When that happens, it's dead easy. But obviously, when there are those ones that don't necessarily, it's taking a best guess.
And again, this is something I've learned as we've gone along when we were creating this, that the boundaries are actually very blurred. And we know less historically, really, than I thought. I made a lot of assumptions that actually working with you on this deck has actually blown apart, which is, a good thing for me, It just, and you realize that the truth is actually a lot less understood, but potentially a lot more fascinating, But yeah, it's, and again, I mean, from a practical level of putting this together, it was a fairly straightforward one, wasn't it? Because I think you knew exactly what you wanted, and you had a very strong sense of which statue we were going to use on this. And I think it's
And I mean, I think with this statue as well is obviously like the images that you see of this statue in, I can't remember, it might be in the Vatican, I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly where it is, but obviously it's in a sort of museum setting. It's very well lit. And obviously the torch is sort of there, but it doesn't have like much of the fire and things.
Well, we added all that later, didn't we?
Exactly, but we totally transformed the notion of it through this very well lit, very defined sort of marble statue, and then we kind of gave it this ethereal quality where it's kind of amongst the clouds, amongst the sky, and then obviously the dapple of the stars in the veil. You know, and we ever so slightly lightened the crescent and put a star in the middle. And then obviously added the sort of more vibrant flames. And it just, again, it was one of those ones. It didn't need a lot, but it was very methodical, sort of one after the other little tweaks that kind of finalized it quite quickly.
And funnily for me, at the time we were doing this, I was working quite frequently with a lovely tarot deck called by Hermann Heindel, the Heindel Tarot, which is kind of quite a classic. But in the Heindel Tarot, the Queen of Swords is actually new to the Egyptian sky goddess. So it was funny for me because actually us working on our image while I was working with a deck that actually showcased something similar it felt very timely for me. And the Heindel deck has become one of my, all-time favorites. Because of the way that it incorporates divinities into the court cards. So So next one. This was a complicated one. Card 22. You can pronounce this. I'll get it wrong.
So again, I probably may get it wrong, but Erototokia, I think, the bearer of love.
Right.
Now, obviously, again, when people think of Hecate, don't necessarily think of love and passion and things. But this is one of those these terms that's found in the Greek magical papyri. It's in there is a spell basically for compelling somebody to fall in love with you, and you call on Hecate and and Aphrodite and a few others to basically. I mean, it's not it's not very ethically sound. It's very it is very suspect, where you're basically telling them that they won't sleep, they won't eat, they won't drink unless they come to you. But there's this notion of Hecate in this bearing love aspect, and this again this whirring, generative, flaming sort of attraction.
I love the concept for this because I mean we discussed this and you immediately said let's use fireworks. So I mean we eventually settled on a base image of a long exposure of a giant Catherine wheel, didn't we? And I think it's created this vortex of fire with the goddess in the center, which I absolutely love. But I also loved the way you wanted to kind of show the universality of love. So we've actually, I mean, beneath her we've got a same-sex couple, but then floating within the flames around her are universal symbols of love and gender. I mean, we've got a transgender symbol, a male and a female, and I love that because again, I hadn't really thought about it, but I think because of our ridiculously patriarchal Christianized culture, we project things back onto sort of Greco-Roman goddesses, and it's never dawned on me that actually she would represent the universality, and certainly I think that's how they would have seen her in ancient times,
Yeah, and especially when you go into things like transgenderism, non-binary, gender fluidity, things like that, there are people that like to think it's a very new thing, and unfortunately, if you do your research, you find out it's as old as old hat. It's been going around for a long time. But one of the things that I found with this card, and the reason that I wanted that sort of, especially the way we've positioned them over sort of the arcing of the fire wheel, and obviously the goddess's outstretched arms, is we look at genders as a polarity, and you've got masculine and feminine, and then there's a transgender thing as well. And in a recent, it's a book called Witchcraft Unchained by I'm going to get his name wrong. I think it is by Ian Chambers, but just let me double check.
Okay.
No, I got his name wrong.
Right.
Witchcraft Unchained by Craig Spencer.
Right.
And in it, he talks about polarity within witchcraft, and he makes a good argument about this whole the polarity of it, and then the non-binary being at the very center. And then I kind of started to view this as in terms of liminality. And obviously, when you think about Hecate and her aspect as a liminal goddess,
yes,
and the fact that she exists in all of those things. So all of those transitional periods, all of those liminal periods, but she's obviously beyond it all. But at the same time, she governs it, and I just really wanted to touch on that, and I wanted to try and make the card represent everybody.
To me, this card raises so many interesting points, particularly when you think of sort of our modern culture. I mean, you and I both know this as gay men. We've spent lifetimes battling prejudice and, a sort of patriarchal, toxic masculinity that views us as somehow less than male or inferior. Whereas, I came out of a culture of coercive and controlling evangelical Christianity. So obviously, when it was discovered that I was gay, that did not go down well. But what was incredibly healing for me was actually leaving that tradition behind and then discovering that in so many other religious traditions, and particularly the more ancient traditions, that somebody like me had come along, as a gay man, I would be viewed as you said, inhabiting that liminal space, along with, so gay men, bisexual women, lesbians, genderqueer folk, trans folk. We were all viewed as occupying that liminal space. So rather than being denigrated within these more ancient traditions, we were revered as the seers, the shaman, precisely because we did, as in that worldview, occupy that liminal in-between space that was seen to be the preserve of the gods and the goddesses. So for me, this is a very powerful card because it really affirms that.
And obviously, again, we looking at it, and you think about bearing love and desires and passions, and although it has elements of that, it's not necessarily just about physical and physicality type things. It's about drive, the passions, the burning passions that drive us, and it's about. I think it's really useful to tap into the energy of this card when you feel maybe your passions are running a bit low, or you're losing interest in something that you actually know deep down is important or that you really value. And again, I think because we've used that sort of whirring generative sort of symbology with the fireworks and that, it's almost like it stokes it back up for you. And that it can go across anything, because desire permeates pretty much every aspect of life. If you want a cream cake, you desire to have that sweet sort of pleasure at the, even on that sort of base level, it's a desire driven thing.
Very much. But I think what I love about this is it really speaks of the sanctity and the hallowedness of desire, which, in so much Western tradition, we don't view desire in that way. It's viewed as a vice. It's viewed as a sin. So for me, this is, it's kind of one of those central cards, from a personal perspective for me in this deck, because its message was so affirmatory, I do love this one.
And I think there's something very freeing about it as well. If you can admit to yourself what your true heart's desire is,
Yeah.
You know, it's so liberating if you can actually go, okay, that's what I want. I'm going to get it. You know,
and that's as empowered as the fire that we've actually depicted on the image, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Good card.
Now, this one is special. This next one is very special.
Yes.
So, 23, Pandatira, All Giver, with the keyword of abundance. Now, the reason this is special, for me anyway, this was the final card that we completed, wasn't it?
Yes.
I have very, very happy memories of doing this because it's the last card always sticks in your mind. For the Healing Light Tarot, it was the Five of Pentacles. But I will never forget just the feeling of absolute adulation and joy when we finalized this image. And then I can remember you just turning to me and saying, "Oh, we've done it. We've completed the deck."
Yeah.
And yeah, it has no other significance in the deck, but it will always be for me a last card, you know. So tell me about this one. It's a lovely. This kind of has Empress vibes for me. It's one of two cards that has Empress vibes for me.
Definitely. I think, you know, we touched on previously this notion that Hecate can give and take, you know, pretty much anything and everything. You know, you look at Hesiod in the Theogony, basically, she's got her fingers in all the pies. You know, she can help you, you know, win things, increase your, you know, your livestock, you know, the catch at sea, you know, your crop yield, but at the same time she can withdraw all of that. But in this notion of her being this all giver, you know, when we think about getting everything that we want or that we need, you know, there is this sense of abundance, especially in, you know, a material Western culture sort of ideal. But I didn't want it to be quite as, I don't know, quite as obvious as that. I wanted to sort of touch more on a sort of, I suppose, a purer form of abundance, and I cannot remember for the life of me where we found this statue.
I was about to ask, funnily enough, because I can't remember either.
No, and it's not, and to be honest, it's not one I'm hugely familiar with. It's not one I've seen before, and I think that was possibly why when I found it, I was like, oh. And it's on Creative Commons. Let's have a go at it. Because although it was this, you know, Greco-Romanesque lady holding obviously a long torch with what we could assume is an apple or a pomegranate or something in her hand, and it just I just got this idea of this version of Hecate standing in an orchard. Now, obviously, apples have a huge history of mythology in and of themselves. Through multiple cultures, you know, they're linked with immortality and wisdom and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, abundance doesn't necessarily have to be physical. It can be spiritual. It can be emotional. You know, it applies to everything. And I just thought that this lush and contented surrounding with a you know, a goddess that's neither, you know, overly happy, but not, you know, she's not stern either. She's just stood in amidst it all, and she's offering serene. Yeah, and she's just offering one single apple in this instance, and it's sometimes just that one thing is enough. You don't need the whole orchard.
No,
you know that, and I think that's where the pitfall comes in with things, especially in, again, Western culture. You know, we're not content with just having the apple that's given to us. We need the whole orchard. You know, and it's. I think I really wanted to sort of draw back onto that simpler time where if somebody offers you that apple, and you can see the orchard that it's come from, that's enough, and that in and of itself is abundance for you. So I kind of really wanted to touch on that.
Simple gifts and simple pleasures are very often the most powerful because they actually bring us back to what really matters.
Yeah,
you know, and this I mean, despite obviously its very practical sort of significance to me as the final card that we completed, albeit it's only halfway through the sequence, there is something what I love about this card is I just find this aspect of her very, very reassuring and very approachable. You know, if I walked through this orchard and saw this woman, I wouldn't immediately be afraid because it's the goddess incarnate. I would actually feel she was very approachable. And there is something about the choice of statue image, but also it is the aspect that is being portrayed here. You know, it's kind of there is a sort of bountiful generosity about this, which I love, but it's simple, and there isn't any sense of greed here as well. I think if you took greed to the table here, you'd get short shift. It's like you say, it's like I'm giving you an apple. That is gift enough. You know, it's a lovely one. So, final one for this episode, but this is one of the more interesting ones for me because one of the things that often gets said about this deck is how dark and raw it is. But one of the things that this next card shows me is the deck is raw because it's not just dark; it actually shows the extremes of everything. Because we this is the extreme of light, isn't it?
Yeah.
So card 24, Sotira, the Savior, and this is with the keyword of salvation. And when you told me about this completely caught me off guard because I had not expected this. I just saw her as a dark goddess. I didn't expect a goddess of blazing light.
Yeah. And I think again, it probably does catch a lot of people off guard. I think a lot of people, when they first see or read about Hecate, it tends to be from a dark goddess sort of angle. But obviously, with this one, Sotira, meaning savior, it's a title that's shared with other gods and goddesses. So, like the masculine version, I think, is Sota. So, like Jupiter, Sota, they had this savior aspect, and things like savior and salvation. It's easy to get sort of bogged down in the sort of Christianized trappings of the word.
Very loaded, yeah.
And I toyed with whether I should use salvation as a key word because I didn't want it to come across as trying to be happy clappy, accept Hecate Sotira into your soul. And all that.
You wouldn't have got very far with me if it was.
But obviously the idea of her as this savior, again, it harkens back to things like the Chaldean oracles, where she's one of these principal deities, and in that interpretation of her, she is the source of souls and the source of virtue, and so all of these things pour forth from her and ultimately return to her, and so we are part of her, eternal cycle, constantly going back in and back out. And I think when I first sort of tried to envisage this card, I think I tried to do it a bit too literally, because I think we did try to have like sort of like colory type stuff coming out of the side to represent the virtues, and it just didn't work. And
it looked a bit Barbie, didn't it?
And I'm deathly allergic to anything pink and sparkly. So we were still trying to make it quite a light and bright image. And then the more I looked at it, the more I thought, well, actually, for those of us that view Hecate Sotira as this very elevated, celestial incarnation of the world soul, and then harkening back to reading myths where mortals do encounter gods in their full glory and obviously don't often survive it. I kind of got this notion of it being a very blinding and very harsh light, to the point where it almost excludes the vision of the goddess, because we can't really look on her in in literal terms, because our brains, our souls, our whatever, they don't process it in the same way.
I love the fact on this card that you can see her outline, but there's such a huge blaze of light that you can't look on her face. The light is emanating from her face, so that you kind of it's there. You can see that outline, but you can't ever know her. You're never going to know what this goddess looks like, because it's just the light's too bright. You kind of just have to accept that she's there, and that's as much as you're going to know. But that's, to me, that's what's so powerful about this. And again, it's actually possibly for me one of the most powerful cards in the deck, precisely because when you're leafing through, you're not expecting it. The deck is quite dark, and then all of a sudden there is this one card that totally blazes with light and more light. And as I say, we tried coloring it; it was a distraction. So, and then as soon as we took it out, it was like, oh yeah, now that's working.
And I think that, again, when you start to think, then not obviously about looking at the goddess, but then looking at the notion of what it could potentially represent, that just because things shine brightly doesn't, it's that all that glitters isn't gold kind of mentality. What is that harsh light obscuring? Are you looking at at divine things, or are you being dazzled by pretty baubles and things like that? And then at the same time, you've got the when you look at this whole salvation thing, it goes back to that notion of faith, which again is a loaded term, especially in pagan circles. It's very difficult to have a conversation with people and talk about faith, because they don't seem to think it applies or has relevance in a pagan setting. But one of the things that I've come across in my years in working with Hecate, and I've experienced it myself. You go through these periods where you can't see her, or you can't feel her. You think, oh, well, she's forsaken me. Have I done something wrong? And I think with this Satiric card, it's about having that faith, because even if she's shining really, really brightly, you still can't see her. So sometimes you've actually got to look for her in other places, look in the darker places. And
it's funny, because you really made me realize that actually I'd always just assumed that very often those periods of blindness are because it's too dark, and actually sometimes it can be because it's too light. And that divinity is just right in your face, but that's precisely the reason why you can't see. And then, as you say, that's when it becomes a faith issue, because you have to kind of follow what you know rather than what you can see.
Definitely there's that you have to have that faith. You have to know that she's still there, know that she's still watching over you, listening to your prayers and stuff. But again, as we've touched on with other cards, she's not literally not going to hold your hand the whole way. And it's not going to be this rainbows and sparkles journey from start to finish. There's going to be times where you fall off the path, where you go down the wrong way. It's all
the one thing I love about this deck is that you banished rainbows and sparkles from the first card onwards, and that's why it's so powerful. I do have a problem with a lot of oracle decks, and certainly a lot of goddess decks, in that they can be very sparkly and very, what's the word? Sanitized is the wrong word, but glamorized. I think is certainly a case with a lot of goddess oracles. And one of the reasons why I when you threw the gauntlet down with this, is because I thought, this is unvarnished. This is, and it's totally unvarnished. So and on that note, that's another 6 cards done. So if you've been watching, we hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you for bearing with us this far. And next time we will be doing cards 25 through to 30.
So, halfway through then.
Halfway through, yeah.
So,
thanks for watching, and join us again soon. We'll look forward to seeing you, and see you next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.